What if the pain you went through didn't break you, but rewrote you into someone the world needed? What if the loneliness, the rejection, the silence wasn't the end of your story, but the beginning of your transformation? That is the powerful evolution of Gaara in Naruto. Because Gaara's journey isn't just about strength, it's about turning trauma into leadership and isolation into purpose. Gaara's story begins in darkness. From the moment he is born, he is not treated as a child. He is treated as a weapon. As the host of Shukaku, he is seen not as a person, but as a threat to be controlled, monitored, and feared. And when a child grows up in an environment where love is replaced by fear, something inside them begins to change. Because we learn who we are through how we are treated. And Gaara is taught very early that he is unwanted. This is where his psychological foundation is formed. Because when a child does not receive love, they don't simply continue without it, they adapt. They find ways to survive emotionally. And for Gaara, that adaptation becomes self-isolation. If no one can be trusted, then no one can hurt you. If no one is allowed close, then rejection becomes impossible. And over time, that isolation turns into something deeper, resentment. Gaara begins to see the world as an enemy, not because he is inherently cruel, but because his experiences have taught him that connection leads to pain, that trust leads to betrayal, that love is not something meant for him. And when someone believes that, their behavior reflects it. He becomes cold, distant, violent, not out of desire, but out of defense. Because if the world sees him as a monster, then he will become one. Not because it's who he is, but because it's what he's been told he is. This is one of the most important truths about trauma. It doesn't just affect how you feel, it affects who you believe you are. And for Gaara, that belief becomes his identity, until he meets Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto represents something Gaara has never truly seen before. Someone who has experienced similar pain, similar rejection, similar isolation, but responded differently. Instead of closing off, Naruto reaches out. Instead of embracing hatred, he chooses connection. And that contrast creates a moment of realization for Gaara that changes everything. Because for the first time, Gaara sees that his path was not the only option. That his pain did not have to define him in the way it did. That there was another way to exist. This moment is not just a turning point, it's a psychological breakthrough. Because when someone who has been trapped in a certain belief system is exposed to a different possibility, it creates conflict. It forces them to question everything they thought was true. And that questioning is the beginning of change. Gaara doesn't transform instantly, but something shifts. The anger that once fueled him begins to lose its foundation. The identity he built around pain starts to crack. And in that space, something new begins to form. Self-awareness. He starts to reflect, to understand, to recognize that his actions were not just responses to the world, but choices he made based on his beliefs. And once you become aware of your choices, you gain the power to change them. This is where Gaara's journey becomes powerful. Because he doesn't just stop being destructive, he begins to rebuild himself. Not by ignoring his past, but by learning from it, by understanding it, by choosing to become something different. And that something is a leader. Gaara becomes the Kazekage, not because of his power, but because of his transformation. Because he understands pain, he understands isolation, he understands what it feels like to be unseen, unheard, unloved. And that understanding gives him something most leaders don't have: empathy. Because the best leaders are not the ones who have never struggled, but the ones who have struggled and learned from it. Gaara leads with awareness, with intention, with a desire to protect rather than control. And this is a complete reversal of who he once was. The same person who once saw the world as an enemy now sees it as something worth protecting. That is transformation. And it doesn't come from forgetting your pain. It comes from redefining it. Gaara doesn't erase his past. He uses it. He allows it to shape his perspective, to guide his decisions, to remind him of what matters. And in doing so, he turns something that once weakened him into something that strengthens others. This is the true power of trauma when it is processed. It becomes insight. It becomes wisdom. It becomes the ability to connect with others on a deeper level. There's also something important about how Gaara earns trust. Unlike characters who are naturally accepted, Gaara has to rebuild his reputation. He has to prove, through consistent action, that he is no longer the person he once was. And that process takes time. It requires patience. It requires commitment. But over time, people begin to see the change. They begin to feel the difference. And trust is slowly restored. Because real change is not about words. It's about consistency. Gaara's leadership is also defined by responsibility. He doesn't take his role lightly. He understands the weight of his position, the impact of his decisions, the importance of protecting those who rely on him. And this awareness makes him careful, intentional, focused. He is no longer acting out of emotion, he is acting out of purpose. And that's the difference between reacting and leading. Gaara teaches us that your past does not disqualify you from becoming something greater, that the things you went through, the pain, the rejection, the isolation, they don't have to limit you. They can become the foundation for something meaningful, but only if you're willing to face them. Because transformation requires honesty. It requires you to look at who you were, understand why you became that person, and choose to become someone different. And that choice is not easy, but it is possible. At the end of the day, Gaara is not defined by the monster people feared, but by the leader he chose to become. Because sometimes, the people who are hurt the most become the ones who protect others the best. And when pain is turned into purpose, it doesn't just change you, it changes everyone around you.